Your Excellencies, dear friends, I'm Zeid Al Hussein, the president of IPI and a member of the elders, and I'd like to begin by extending a warm welcome to all of you to this session of the UN at 80, Charting a Path for the Future of Multilateralism. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this. Of all the panels that we've had, of all the discussions that I've been involved with, I don't think the electricity that the elders can bring to a meeting has quite been where it needs to be. And so today I'm convinced it will be there. I know the elders very well. We are all strong supporters of the multilateral system. We are not, though, propagandists for it, nor are we apologists for it if it stumbles or acts incompetently or is paralyzed. We believe in a system that needs to function and function well. We have a paper on multilateralism which has recently been updated, and we will hear very soon from the chair of the elders, Juan Manuel Santos, the former president of Colombia, the architect of the peace process in Colombia, Nobel Prize winning laureate, and the face of the elders publicly. We're also, of course, accompanied by Mary Robinson and Helen Clark. In fact, the three of them are here so often, I think they're moving into IPI. And by also Nudara Yusuf, co-chair of the coalition of the UN We Need. And Nudara is an honorary elder for today, at least. So can I begin by introducing to you or calling Juan Manuel to the podium to deliver keynote remarks, and then we'll go to panel discussion. Please.
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for being here. Ladies, gentlemen, dear friends, it is a pleasure to be with you here today for this timely and very opportune discussion. As chair of the elders, I am honored to be at the International Peace Institute, and I want to thank our friend Zeid for his very always generous hospitality. As we gather here in New York to mark the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, it is fair to say that in 2025, multilateralism needs all the friends it can get. Today, our world faces a dangerous set of existential threats. No single country can address threats like climate change, nuclear weapons, pandemics, or AI on its own. We need a multilateral system that is fit for purpose and reflects the world of 2025, not 1945. This is why the elders have just published this new policy position paper, Global Cooperation in a Fragmented World. We certainly do not claim to have all the answers, but we hope to stimulate debate in the days and weeks ahead. Throughout my career in public life, I have always tried to avoid sensationalist or overly dramatic language. So it is with a sense of sober regret that I feel compelled to say today that the multilateral system is facing its greatest crisis since the end of the Second World War. The current erosion of international norms and institutions is leaving the world dangerously exposed. Without bold change, the UN risks irrelevance and collapse at a moment when humanity most needs global cooperation. The architecture of the multilateral system must be reshaped to ensure fairness, effectiveness, and legitimacy. In our paper, the elders set out a series of recommendations to make global institutions more effective, more representative, focusing on global security, on public goods, on solidarity, on respect for international law, and greater inclusion of women, of youth, and marginalized groups. In concrete terms, we urge UN member states to push for a single 7-year term for the post of Secretary General and to nominate women candidates. We also expect the next UN Secretary General to end the ring facing of senior UN roles to nationals from powerful countries, as repeatedly called for by the UN General Assembly. And we support efforts to drive forward a consolidated model for UN Security Council reform over the coming General Assembly sessions, which improves both the Council's representativeness and effectiveness and has a realistic chance of securing General Assembly approval and final ratification by the P5. We are urging these reforms precisely because the past 80 years show the value of multilateralism and the need to sustain it, preventing for example, a third world war, eradicating smallpox, reducing poverty, or establishing human rights norms, just to name a few. We must reject the counter the siren songs of isolationism, unilateralism, and militarism. And we must take inspiration from bold and courageous leaders such as Dag Hammarskjöld or Kofi Annan, who enhanced the institutional reach and power of the UN. Ladies and gentlemen, today's political leaders now have the task and the responsibility to ensure long overdue reforms. They must collectively resist efforts by certain countries to undermine global cooperation. This means forging alliances between North and South, East and West, even where those alliances are difficult. As a group of people who have held high office in governments and international organizations around the world, we, elders, have experienced the noblest hopes of multilateral cooperation, its dismal disappointments, and all that falls between. Multilateral cooperation is not an abstract concept or a utopian aspiration. It is a precondition for the peaceful, inclusive, and resilient future we all want. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan Manuel. And I'd like to continue now by giving the floor to, I think we start with Mary, and then Helen, and then we go to Nodara. Opening comments. and then we will open up for discussion, please.
Thank you, Zeid. And actually, my opening comments are going to be very short because I have been looking through the list of the people who have come for this meeting. I have to describe you as, I don't know all of you, but I know quite a number of the names on this list. You're good nuisance people, and we need to hear from you. I say that because we felt as elders it was necessary to have a paper on our fragmented world and yet how we can move forward with multilateral cooperation, because we absolutely need that. And I just want to say something that I feel very strongly about the way in which the elders approach multilateral cooperation. We've talked long before this paper about long view leadership, the need to have it based on science, on evidence, but also on empathy. And we have actually calibrated slightly differently, because we've also had a lot of intergenerational conversations. And we now say long view leadership with co-decision by different generations. And I think that is really very important. Our world is very young, and young people need to be involved. And young people are very disillusioned about the globalization that we have left them with, about the multilateral system as it stands at the moment, the mess that we have made of our world. So we absolutely need to do better. And in particular, we have the deliberate undermining of international rule of law, and almost worse than that, domestic rule of law, including in this country, in ways that are really very serious. And we need more people to stand up for that, to stand up against that, to speak out against that. I know it's not easy sometimes when you're living in a country when certain things are happening, but we're not hearing enough voices. So I would just plead that we have more people standing up to the bullies in the world that are trying to undermine our system, that are trying to destroy the values, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the other values that we put together. And I'm going to stop there because I really want to hear from you after my fellow panelists have spoken. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. That was characteristically Mary. So Helen, please.
Well, thank you, Zeid. Good afternoon, everyone. And following on from what Mary said, this is not the audience to give a lecture on multilateralism to. You're all extremely well informed. But I think the purpose of today really is to say that the elders are committed to a strong multilateral system. We don't really have one at the moment. So what are the reforms that are needed to reinvigorate it? In its 80th year, it's limping along and could clearly do with a refresh. At the Charter Review 109 event on Monday night, I said, you know, is it too much to hope that member states might be able to have an adult conversation about what needs to be done? And I'm optimistic that you could have an adult conversation about a Charter Review and overhaul. But I think in the points made in the document, we also identify those sort of big areas of existential threat that the elders speak to, the threat of nuclear weapons, the threat of climate change, the threat of pandemics, all of which need a strong multilateral system to be able to bring people together around finding solutions. And two of those areas, addressing the climate crisis and addressing the ongoing threat of pandemics, require financing for global public goods on a scale we do not have at the current time. So we raise in the paper the issue of being innovative in global public finance, and the global public investment one is one that we've given some support to discussion on as a new way of getting public finance around provision of global public goods. So I think I'll leave my comments at that. I find quite compelling the case that's being made for a charter review and the issues that could deal with. And I think that our focus on these existential threats and where they need financing, how you might be innovative, is probably of interest coming out of this document. Thank you, Zeid.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. And Nodara, please.
I have the extremely unenvious task of following Mary Robinson and Helen Clark. And if they said that they're not going to, speak too long because of the expertise in this room, then boy, I should be like 10 seconds long on this. But they did say that they wanted me to be a bit provocative and speak for a little bit longer to try to provoke this room a little bit. So I will take direction from my elders and do just that. Look, I don't know how many of you have actually read this report on global cooperation from the elders, but there are some really distinct action items and calls to action that come out of this report, right? So oftentimes when we see, okay, here's what we need to do, here's the action, we say, what's the roadmap for it? How do we build consensus around it? How do we push forward? Well, I'll argue that we actually spent the last 4 years building that roadmap and creating that consensus, right? Pact for the Future, Action 39 to 41 are commitments on Security Council reform. Action 47 to 52 on financial architecture reform. Global Digital Compact, Objective 5, that's on AI governance for humanity. So there is a roadmap that was agreed on by 193 countries. So we've done the consensus part, but we also know that the pact didn't have nearly as much teeth as I think many of us wanted it to have, right? The folks, and I'm again going to just be provocative here and say the folks that are trying to inject distrust in the global system, in the system that we work towards, are very well organized. But on this side of the aisle, we're well intentioned, but the benefits and costs are dispersed. And anyone who's done Public Policy 101 knows that that just sets us up to fail. And let's be clear, the system was not one that was built on as grand a bargain as it claims to be. It was a group of largely men, elite political characters in San Francisco signing a document. Like, it wasn't a grand bargain for the whole world that maybe still reflects the dynamics of the world today. So rather than lamenting the, slow death of the post-World War order, when do we on this side of the aisle decide, okay, it's over? Let's be intentional about how we rebuild this. Let's be intentional about who this new system is going to benefit and how we're going to activate it. So activating the calls to action in this report really require us to go beyond intention. And I think there, we really need to start galvanizing ambitious coalitions for implementation. We have baseline agreement. Let's start building groups that are willing to push further on certain issues. 3 countries want to implement future generations policies at their national level. Okay, let's support them. You have allies here, here, here. Let's work together to make that happen. There's actually more than 3. There's a group of friends on future generations chaired by Jamaica, Netherlands, Portugal, and others are part of that group as well. Let's put our energy there. Brazil wants an ambitious climate reform at COP30. Okay, let's pump our energy there and support Brazil. Look, there will always be naysayers, but there are 2 other groups of countries that really need our attention right now. First are the champions who need administrative and substantive support to rally the troops. And second are the ones on the fence who need the case made to step up and take a stance on an issue. This year is not about what we need to do. That was 2022 to 2024, and it culminated in the Pact for the Future. This year, and possibly even the next decade, is about who's going to step up and do it. I know there's a temptation to say the struggle we all feel right now, I see tired faces in the room, it's been a long year, right? It's tempting to say it's just a blip, it will blow over. No, let's be clear, the post-World War II order is over. I think there were speeches earlier this week that reinforced that. And so let's accept that. Let's move beyond a unilateral, multilateral system that collapses when one country pulls back. And this starts when each of us in this room and those watching online start putting our energy behind those who want to push a little bit further on a couple agendas, so that you don't have to wait for permission from everyone. Know that civil society, know that experts in the room are going to pump their energy behind you if you're willing to take that first step forward. Look, I'm in my mid-20s. I sit at this table with this wonderful group of youth alumni with me today. And I tell you that multilateralism is not a choice, right? It's inevitable. The UN is not a choice. We need to be, yes, fearlessly optimistic, but also aggressively opportunistic about the way that we use it. Thank you.
Thank you. when Mary started speaking, I was sitting at the back of my chair and I started inching forward. And by the time Nudara finished, I'm right now forward. So, now you're prompting me to say something, Nudara, and I think we have to.
Do go ahead.
I'm going to say something. I'm going to say something. I think we have to be careful not to mimic those that are opposing us, and that is to say, they are overreacting, and we should not. Right? We don't do the opposite of what they do because that's what they're trying to do with us. And the thing is to think, I think you have an absolute critical point that civil society needs to do what governments cannot do. So let's take the point that that Juan Manuel raised, the election of the Secretary General. Is it enough to say that we demand that there must be a woman Secretary General, elected at the next round? And would the General Assembly, are we convinced the General Assembly would reject any nominee that wasn't a woman? Now, the thing is, we have to think about it. In the last 20 years, has the General Assembly consistently elected strong presidents of the General Assembly? And anyone who dares say yes, I'd ask you to stand up and name them. And so the question is, we have to be very careful about how we approach this. Right? This is where civil society can help. The other thing, I think, and Jeff Feltman is with us. He chaired a session 2 days ago in the General Assembly on the selection of the next Secretary General. I think there's a sort of emerging feel that the peacemaking function of the UN has all but disappeared, and the critical role the Secretary General plays as the chief international mediator, so to speak, must be restored. Will we make that demand? Will the General Assembly insist upon that and say to the Security Council, if a candidate is nominated that the General Assembly doesn't believe is up to it, would the General Assembly oppose? And then what happens then? Do we have an acting Secretary General or no Secretary General for a while? Right? And I think here we need to sort of fill in the gaps. So the call by the elders is clear. It works on as a reflection of and supports civil society. But we need to sort of think very clearly how we're going to make this actually work and where we're going to put the pressure. So that's my additional provocation beyond Nudara's. Now, there's so many people here. It's like watching one's own biography, because at every stage of my life, I see someone who's sitting here. So can we open the floor now to reflections about what we see happening at the UN and how we think we can make adjustments. And if you haven't read the elders report, please do. I have to say, though, that every day as we take part in panels and listen to other people, one is shaped by what other people say, not listening to Nudara. We're old, and as Kofi used to say, we're not too old to learn, though. So the floor is open. But Mary, if you're itching to say something, you can always jump in. Does anyone want to? Jeff, please. No. Jeff, sorry, you need to come up to the podium because the signal is being scrambled by the signal is being scrambled from the Secret Service on the other side. So. And you need to push that's it.
Thanks very much for the opening remarks, Mr. President. Thanks to the panel, and I certainly agree with the themes that you're bringing out. But on the specific question of the Secretary General of selection, the General Assembly, of course, adopted a resolution on September 5th. I think many people were disappointed by that resolution. That seemed to be, in some areas, a step back from the 2016 selection. The language on civil society is watered down significantly. The Women's Secretary General language was not what was originally proposed, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess my question, I was proud to have served the UN in one of those positions that the powerful member states should not be able to control. But I was never a representative to the UN. I never participated as a member state representative. So I don't know the answer to my question. Can the General Assembly now, despite that disappointing GA resolutions from September 5th, take measures such as town halls with civil society, things that would bring more transparency into the process of selection, and try to ignite excitement about the selection? Because part of the problem with the UN right now is, yes, we have to have all sorts of reforms with the financial issues, et cetera. But part of it too, which is related, is reigniting excitement about multilateralism, reigniting interest in the UN. And so I'm wondering how to use this selection process to do that, despite the fact that that GA resolution was weak. And one specific example is Article 97 of the Charter reads something along the lines of Helen, we talked about this yesterday, the General Assembly shall, the Secretary General shall be appointed by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council, is the language, something like that. Can the General Assembly say, okay, we're going to do that, just like the Charter says, but give us multiple candidates? In the same way that Liechtenstein led the consensual resolution in 2022 that changed the practice of the veto. It didn't take away the privilege of the veto, but it changed the practice by forcing a veto wielding power of the Security Council to appear before the General Assembly and explain itself, the state. So can the General Assembly do things like that within the context of the existing charter that would force the Security Council to give multiple candidates? Or can the General Assembly do things to overcome the weakness of that September 5th GA resolution on the ad hoc committee on revitalization of the General Assembly?
And the General Assembly under Article 10 can do pretty much anything it wants, except where there's Article 12 concerned, which is if the Security Council is seized by the issue. But I think the point you're raising, Jeff, is a critical one, because even in the Security Council, the powers of the President of the Security Council haven't really fully been explored. And I can tell you, when I was preparing for service on the Security Council, I spent all my time on the agenda items, but no one ever sat with me and said, are you aware of what you can do as President of the Security Council? And do you understand how the double veto works? And a very strong President of the Security Council, representing a country that will back them fully, can do certain things which hitherto haven't been done. So can the General Assembly explore that area? I think it can. It surely can. Does it need to have a sense of solidarity over? I mean, if the Council presents someone that's manifestly ill-suited to the post, one hopes that there would be sufficient cacophony, to reject it. But your point is the critical one. What if the person you're not sure, and then you need to go through a proper exercise of vetting, and you need 2 or 3 candidates, and for the General Assembly to choose? I think that is certainly should be doable, no?
I think a strong PGA should get on and run the town halls and the transparency as was done last time, notwithstanding that the resolution is weak. It's the lowest common denominator, but as Zeid says, the PGA has powers and should use them. So one would hope that it would be at least to the level of last time, where there is that public debate facilitated in the auditorium, which was really quite interesting. And then the sessions with the candidates, the 2-hour sessions, those are important as well. And I think that would all be a prerequisite then to any greater assertion of authority. Should a candidate widely considered unsuitable come as a recommendation? Because if you've had everybody set out their wares publicly, it becomes rather clear who could not do the job, right? And now you will have a range who could do the job. But if the recommendation comes from one who is widely seen as inadequate in hearings, that surely should trigger some kind of revolt. So I think the I'd certainly encourage a debate among member states, sort of friends of the process, as to whether they should start talking about having more than one candidate. I think that would be very positive, more than one coming for decision, but then also contemplating what to do in the event that someone widely seen as unsuitable was picked, and demanding that it go back.
Prince Zeid, if I may just add a very quick point there. On the civil society front, the 1 for 8 billion campaign is doing some really interesting stuff to increase transparency, try to call for civil society town halls. So I think if folks are interested, I would definitely direct you to have a look at that campaign specifically. And there was an instance, I think it was 1991, that the Security Council put forward 2 recommendations, Butcher Scali and one other candidate, who was then withdrawn. So there is precedent, and I think it would be important to build on that.
But we have to also be careful. Hammarskjöld himself was not a great public speaker, and neither was Uthand, but they were effective secretaries general. So we can't let the gloss sort of cover or mask what other attributes are needed, sort of moral consistency, good political senses, all of the other things that we need, I think, as well. Mary, do you want to pile in? No, okay. Please. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Jérôme Bellion-Jourdan, Institute for Global Negotiation. I come from the world of diplomacy, and Zeid, always pleased to reconnect with you, and Mary as well, President Santos, and all of you. A few reflections, not necessarily on what was said today, because I agree with everything that was said, but a reflection on the conversations we're having in New York this week, where it gives sometimes the impression that we have a world divided also on the idea that we need the UN, that we need multilateralism. And I'm wondering whether we're not necessarily fueling a perception of a world which is against the very principle of multilateralism. Because if we believe in multilateralism, that means that we believe that each state, irrespective of who heads the government or the state at a given time, is part of the multilateral system, and therefore we need to take states where they are, and try to make the case that yes, it is worth to continue investing in multilateral negotiations, and that's where I bring in the word negotiation, because I think what we see now is that we're in 2025. But in the many negotiation processes that I've been involved in, or that I now continue to be advising on, we lead an initiative, Global Negotiation Support, to support chairs and multilateral processes. We're still miles away from the way we could be engaging in negotiations. We have formats of negotiations that are of another age. We lack creativity and innovation. We have often a very much win-lose approach to negotiation, where states come with positions, red lines, and we know that in multilateral negotiation that doesn't work. It leads to deadlock or common lowest denominator. So it's an invitation maybe to the panel to reflect on what is it that we can bring back a true spirit of negotiation, where we take the states where they are, so that they have ultimately an interest in engaging in the negotiation and forging that common ground, which is increasingly difficult, but it's also maybe as a lack of listening to where the states come from, listening to their interests, their needs, and that's what is needed to move from the kind of win-lose to the win-win. So maybe reflection on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mary, please.
Juan Manuel Santos and myself took part in a breakfast meeting yesterday morning where it was very interesting to see a very large polling that the Rockefeller Foundation has engaged in, huge polling globally on, do people want multilateralism? Do they want cooperation between states? And to see how positive the feedback is. There's a great deal of detail in it. It's, I think, very, very well worth looking at. It's as though, yet again, the people are ahead of their leaders on some of these issues, as on climate and nature on itself. People want action on climate, but this is broader. This is on, do you want multilateral collaboration? the UN doesn't come too well out of that. I think the reason for that is very largely the negative image of the Security Council. When you have veto after veto after veto, I think people are very disillusioned and think that is the UN as a whole. But the poll shows people recognize problems are very complex. Existential threats can't be solved either by any country or any region. They need the cooperation. And I think this is a kind of reassuring poll in that sense that I hope leaders will take more seriously.
I think, I mean, you make a critical point, though, that multilateral negotiations at the highest level is an art form. Not everyone can do it. There are a lot of people who can't do it. I mean, that's for sure. There's some people who can do it extremely well. But what we have to recognize is that there's some very stupid features that we have, right? Very stupid. The nothing is agreed till everything agreed is very stupid. The idea of a consensus rule is stupid. It means basically that every country has a veto. That was tried in the League. It was dispensed with. It doesn't say, there's nothing in the Charter that says that. It's one country, one vote. If you apply the voting rule in most of the procedures we have, things would fly through. Why is it in climate that we don't have the voting rule applied? Not since the second COP has it been applied. Right? Why are we so stymied on proliferation of nuclear weapons in the NPT review process? Can't even get past the agenda. So there's some very stupid things we just have to clear out of the system. Appoint the right people to chair the negotiations who know what they're doing, and things can move. And we saw this on the pandemics. The elders have been very involved. Mary, Helen, Juan Manuel, Ernesto Zedillo, very involved. And we saw at the end of the negotiations, things really move when they look more like a traditional negotiation. And so the system is capable of doing great things. But like the system, the UN has to appoint the right people to the right post. I mean, let's speak frankly, in the intimacy of this room and with thousands of people watching. I mean, it is eye-watering, some of the appointments, eye-wateringly bad, and some outstanding. There's no consistent, but if it's a political calculation that makes people, makes the appointments happen, then is it a surprise that we have, disastrous consequences on the ground? All of us, and there's so many here I've served with in the UN, and I look at Nina, we were in the former Yugoslavia together, we know that if you put the right person in the right post, small miracles will happen. So let's just do that to start off with. We don't have to be overly grandiose about it. I think that's my 2 cents. I don't know. Helen, do you want to join? By the way, when I ran for Secretary General, I only got 2 votes. So I don't know how many votes Helen got, but maybe the 2 of us could run together. And with Mary, maybe the 3 candidates who served. Please, Helen. You don't? No. Okay. Sorry. Who would like to go next? Let's go this way and then come to you, Jeff, please. Bye.
The next one better be a woman.
There's a lot of young women in the room.
Please.
Thank you. Ben Phillips from Global Cooperation Institute. Firstly, thank you to the panel, not just for brilliant recommendations, but for the fact that you're not defending the old, you are building the new. You're not trying to cling on to what was, but trying to shape what will be. So in that same spirit, when we analyze what's gone wrong, why internationalism has been trashed, why the international institutions have had a wrecking ball taken to them, we can, on the one hand, both blame the bad people who are taking that wrecking ball, but we also have to reflect on why was our structure so structurally vulnerable that it was so easy to take a wrecking ball to. And in particular, I'd like you to reflect on the question of public support and public opinion. Why is it that in New York, when people see the huge black vehicles heading towards the UN, they don't say, thank God these heroes are off to save the world. They say these fat cars are causing the traffic. But that mentality is common across the world. That multilateralism, internationalism, is a method by which we improve the lives of everybody. But it's begun to be seen as a kind of elite caste of people who float above the rest. So how, when we make these reforms, when we change finance in order that it moves towards the global public investment approach, when we change peace and security so it moves towards more equal collaboration, when we make these reforms, how do we ensure that popular support is providing the wind in the sails?
It's a great question. Who would like to tackle this? Yeah, Nadar.
I can maybe jump in because I think generationally speaking, young people are probably the most skeptical of whether or not multilateralism works. There's a couple reasons for it. I think, firstly, we live in a second-hand information world, right? So you're rarely the person in the General Assembly hall, not necessarily this room, so we'll talk about rarely the person in Congress listening to the news. You kind of have it mediated to you through the media. And bad news is a lot flashier than good news. It's a lot easier to sensationalize and sell news that says something didn't work than to say we got an incremental change on a very small little document that makes a huge difference 10 years down the line. You know, it's hard to sell the UN because it's a protection-based organization. So when an organization's success is based on something that didn't happen, preventing wars, preventing pandemics, it's really hard to measure when it's worked. You only see when it's failed. So I think as civil society and experts in the room, as member states, as experts, because whatever badge you're wearing today, you're here because you care about the multilateral system. I think we have to do a better job of setting up the metric of success for the UN in a way that is easier to make the case for why it exists, because it does a lot on a day-to-day basis. If tomorrow the UN didn't exist, I think we would really be in a world that we didn't understand. So like, what does a day without the UN looks like? That needs to be communicated quite strongly.
Yeah, I think the fact that we don't have a loyal opposition, you know, when we were serving in peacekeeping 30 years ago, if we, out of complete or sheer incompetence, you know, defaulted on our duty, we would blame the Security Council for too many resolutions, blame the member states for not making monies available. We weren't looking at our own performance as to whether, and no one was really attacking us on performance, because they felt if they attacked us, they're attacking multilateralism, and then if you attack, are you a disgruntled ex-UN person who never got the promotion? And it creates a problem, because if there's no loyal opposition, right, then there is opposition and there's no loyalty to the idea of multilateralism. And I think we need to, you know, it should not be sacrilegious to say, I don't think the Secretary General is doing a good job. And I'm saying so publicly. I mean, what is the danger there? You know, and then maybe if the Secretary General says, let's have a discussion, then we can talk to the Secretary and say, why are you not more dynamic? Why are you not visiting more than one peace mission a year? You know, why are you not trying to mediate in more of the roles? Why is it so impossible to say it publicly? And if we don't say it, then others who really mean harm to the multilateral system can jump in.
Yes, I remember being quite shocked when I was getting ready to come up to be the head of UNDP in 2009. And the New Zealand media, who, you know, by and large aren't Fox News, nonetheless, more or less ran the same lines. Why would you want to go there to lead corrupt organizations in a larger corrupt organizational framework? That was the mindset, that the UN was quite discredited. And the truth is that, you know, there's plenty of things that have happened which have been a serious lapse of moral standards and ethics, which have contributed to that. You know, go back to the headlines around oil for food, back to various headlines about missing money. go back to, did cholera come from peacekeeping forces in Haiti? Go back to any number of allegations about sexual violence perpetrated by peacekeepers. Go back to the UN sort of sitting in its compound while the genocide took place in Rwanda, or not intervening on Srebrenica. I mean, the reality is the UN's contributed to a lot of its own bad headlines, if we're talking truth to power here. So there's a huge image problem. And that needs to be addressed. And as long as the UN keeps giving media these headlines, the image will persist that it's an organization that's not worth, putting your money into. And then that feeds the populist authoritarian type politicians who don't really like anything that might, create an international agreement that they have to live up to, and they don't want to live up to them. So here's the problem. So in the revamp, I think, a few home truths have to be told about how the UN's created some of its own misfortune, and a fresh start should mean a fresh commitment to ethical ways of working.
And added to that, the structures are not fair. They don't represent the world. And secondly, there are double standards, and some of them very serious, particularly the war in Iraq. That's so undermined a credibility. And now we have different double standards in relation to the wars we have, an ignoring of Sudan, a different approach towards Russia and sanctions than Gaza, and so on. So all of this is making people angry about what they're seeing. But at the same time, it's interesting that you have this polling that people do want governments to cooperate, because they see the necessity. So I think what we're trying to do in this paper is be critical of what needs to be criticized, but try to work. And I very much agree, the coalitions of the willing is how I think we have to go forward in a multipolar world. Do our best, and maybe reform 109, begin a process. Gordon Brown, when he was promoting the polling system yesterday of Rockefeller, spoke about the Atlantic Charter, and maybe we need. He thinks we maybe need a new global charter. All of these ideas, I think, are worth thinking about.
Thank you. We have a number of questions online, but I'd give one more question and we need a non-male Jeff. So, so please, lady, yes, please.
Is it on? Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for convening today's event and for your interventions. My name is Julia. I'm from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. As you really noted across the past question, nothing has been more damaging to the reputation of the UN than its inability to act in the face of atrocity crimes around the world. And we've seen across the board, particularly in some of the work that we're doing, the backtracking on political commitments to principles such as the responsibility to protect. So I just want to ask very candidly, what the value then becomes of a multilateral system if it manifestly fails to protect those who are most vulnerable? And I guess in the reflections on reform, specifically with the UN 80 initiative, how do we ensure that reforms maintain protection as the core mandate of the UN to ensure its legitimacy? Thank you so much.
I mean, part of it, I think, is moral consistency. When Mary and I held the post of UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, you can see every state practice double standards, every state. So where with respect to your friends, you sort of keep relatively quiet. I mean, we saw this with a number of conflicts. And where it concerns a rival or someone else, you're fully in. You're full in when it comes to responsibility to protect. So the thing is, the independent entities within the UN, including the office that we served, or the independent, the organs of the Human Rights Council, those need to be heeded. The warnings need to be heeded. And we can't start accusing others without looking inward. When Kofi asked me to be his advisor on sexual exploitation and abuse, I was invited twice to address the Security Council about the findings. I didn't mention the abuses of any country other than my own, my peacekeepers or the peacekeepers of the country I represented. I was not going to point fingers at others. I was just going to look in. And there was only one other country that followed me in doing that. Everyone else is happy to point fingers at others and not look at their own record. So we have to grow up. I mean, states have to grow up. Hammarskjöld talked about it in 1959, or it was 1959. He spoke about the maturity of states, that they're still almost infantile in the way that they operate, in seeing the value of the international system. And we're still in adolescence almost. We still have to make the case for multilateralism, which is so self-evident almost. You just have to think about it a little bit. And so it's an oddity almost. Sorry.
Yes, I think that the double standards have been very, very debilitating for the UN system. If you think back to the invasion of Iraq, which was done against international law, but nothing is ever done about those who do blatantly abuse international law. I remember as New Zealand Prime Minister at the time, crafting the interventions for New Zealand to make it the Security Council. And a point I always made was that, if some states decide to take unilateral action in invading others, don't complain when others come and do the same thing. Well, hello. What is invoked by Russia when it excuses its invasions of Ukraine? It's, well, you did it to Iraq. I think on responsibility to protect, that almost died in the water after the Libyan intervention. And there was the Security Council resolution back in 2011, which authorized member states to take all necessary measures to protect Libyan civilians, etc. But that quickly became for NATO regime change. So then responsibility to protect to a lot of countries became, well, if that gets away, they'll be after us. It'll be regime change. So none of this helps. And then, as Mary said, the double standards, vis-a-vis what happens in Ukraine, what happens in Gaza, the complete overlooking of Sudan, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if we're going back to first principles and a more ethical approach, I think there's quite a lot to work on.
There's a question online, which is intriguing. And so thank you for all of those who've sent in their questions. It says, who is us? Have we honored the us referred to repeatedly in your presentations? Or what lessons have we learned from assuming we have an us, but continuing to replicate practices of exclusion leveraged against those who advocate for social justice and transformation for all? In short, what is our responsibility for creating this mess? And in part, I think it sort of triggers in my mind the Pact for the Future, the opening lines at the summit, because it's signed by all the heads of states and government that are responsible for bringing us to this mess, but not just them, the people who elected them and so forth, and yet no sort of ownership of the responsibility for bringing us to this mess, just a sort of path forward, but no sort of reckoning. And so it leaves, I think, in the minds of some, the feeling that there's some missing mea culpa sort of that needed to be there. But who would like to address the question of us? No.
I think it's a very telling question on what we've been discussing. So much of the world is excluded from this discussion, and yet needs good decisions. We committed many years ago to gender equality. Just take an example. If we had real parity in our world today, that means that half the governments of the world would be run by women, women at the top. Women are not better than men. That's not the argument. The argument is that we need both women and men with their different approaches. Very often, women who come out of the women's movement are much less hierarchical, they're problem solving, they're practical, they have empathy for those that they're serving, etc. And I've been involved in a lot of networking with women's movements here in New York this week, and every conversation is positive, determined, trying against what seem to be powerful forces that are preventing, because most of the decision making on AI is, a few male billionaires who are ruining the world as we speak, who are, busy with their algorithms, and then are determined to explore the outer reaches of a technology they don't understand, so that we can create something super above us that we don't understand that will destroy us. You couldn't make it up. And it's because we don't have that parity between women and men. We don't have parity because of the inequalities in our world. We don't have a sense of countries, yes, to its credit, the UN has members and each member gets their turn in certain measure, but really we don't have the us. And I'm actually so worried about two words that I heard at a launch earlier this week of a women's network on security. And this women's network, to their great credit, have taken security in the broadest possible sense, including cognitive security. Think about that, cognitive security. It is at risk in our world. We have so much fake, so much deliberate lies, so much images that are false. Everything's turned upside down. And I think what we have to hold on to, apart from anything else, is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And not just Article 1, which sums up what many people think about, and it is a wonderful article. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. But I more and more think we need Article 29, the first sentence, which the human rights community, to our discredit, have never promoted enough. Article 29, the first sentence says, everyone has duties to the community in which alone you reach the free and full expression of your personality. In other words, you have to know you have duties to the community and do something about it. And anybody who has done it, and I'm sure many in this room would agree with me, when you do take community seriously and do something, you yourself know you get much more back than you give. You feel a rounded, better person. And that's what the Universal Declaration is saying. And we have to get back to the basics of what it is to be human. And that's why the why us is a very good question. We need a better why us. We need a more diverse why us. We need a more comprehensive, equal why us in our world, and we will have a better system working. And I love the expression of Samuel Beckett, fail again, fail better. We have failed to have a system. Let's fail better now and have a better system.
Prince, if I may add, and it's very hard to follow Mary Robinson, who's so inspirational, but just an additional thought here is just, I think it's this exact struggle to understand the us that is causing so much tension right now, right? Who is this new multilateralism for? Who defines this new multilateral bargain? Who are the big players in this new multilateralism? And what are the power structures that we're working with? So just to add, I think if we're really intentional about a multilateralism 2.0 or a UN 2.0, I think those of us that have been engaging in the 1.0 space have to really introspect what we reinforce in that old dynamic every day that we're in this space. And it's not easy to get past that, but I think it starts with just really deeply thinking about the systems that we reinforce in our day-to-day actions.
And perhaps it's not always that we agree with Aristotle, but there's certain things you might want to agree with him on. We start local. The other day we had a discussion about representation, and it's quite amazing to think that only 21% of permanent representatives at the UN are women, 21% now. The high point was 26%. So we're not even close to parity at the level of representatives here at the UN. And why don't we just publish the numbers every year? Just, how is it possible that a country like France, 80 years practically on the Security Council, has never had a woman ambassador in the council? And why, these sort of things are not to shame a country, but it's to recognize that there's certain things which are just puzzling, just strange, right? And you could say it perhaps is shameful that whoever makes the decisions in the foreign ministry or the prime ministry gives account for the fact that half the population needs to be better represented at an international body. So I think there are things we can do locally that can work to address some of these issues.
So just to say, Blue Smoke is a great initiative that actually does publish a lot of those numbers. There's definitely gaps to fill, but just for those interested.
Yeah. Okay. Question. So, Jeff, shall we come to you because you have been an old? Yes, if you have a good question, that is. So, Jeff is an old friend of so many of us. Not an old friend. You're a friend.
No, old. Hi, Jeff Laurenti, now chairman of the Coalition for Peace Action based in Princeton. We have been here before, as Helen Clark pointed out. In the 1980s, the UN was already seen as irrelevant, unable to deal with the challenges. That was the era of multilateral globaloney. And Paris the Cuellar was an invisible doormat. And then suddenly we had a solution to Namibia, solutions in the Central American civil wars. The first decade of this century, as has been noted, with the US invasion of Iraq, and quote, we're an empire now, we make our own reality, as the then president's chief political guru had said. But there was going to again be a turn of the wheel. It was succeeded by Obama, period of engaged multilateralism. The urgency now is to avoid a 1930s complete rupture that cannot then be put back together. And particularly those of my English accent, that is, of my nationality, have to be working to get these issues on our political agendas in these coming election cycles, assuming we will still have elections. I don't know how this can be done in, let's say, the next largest state's political system to put these issues on that country's political agenda. But we're obviously in a snit right now, which was very eloquently, well, maybe not eloquently, unmistakably articulated by the dear leader's remarks on Tuesday. But, and this goes to policy position number 3 in the report, he did say quite unexpectedly, I don't know whether this was ad-libbed, in which case this is official policy, but to change tomorrow, or whether it was intended, quote, we want to have a cessation of the development of nuclear weapons. If this be globalism, let's make the most of it. So I would like to ask the panel, how in practical terms do you think we could take this suggestion put out there, the only bright light in a speech of dark smoke, and nurse out of this some concrete actions on that whole nuclear file in the next 3 years, and hope then to be able to go further, because talking about the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons is going to send him back into his sovereigntist crouch. But is there something that a coalition can do to build on this one tantalizing hint of an opportunity for progress in what otherwise seems so bleak a landscape?
Well, I would think if there are any PRs here in the room or delegations, you immediately want to rush and draft a resolution using those exact words and then adopt it in the General Assembly. But it did happen once where President Bush at the time made a speech, and the Palestinian representative took the exact words of that speech without modification, put it into a resolution which was vetoed by the US. So it's not a guarantee that something like that can work. But I thank you for the food for thought, certainly, Jeff. I mean, it's not it may be a redirection on policy. I don't know if we are committed to the nuclear file. Mary, would you like? But something like that needs to be studied, certainly. Yes. In the back, sir. Yes. You need to come all the way to the front. You need to do the long walk. It's always horrible when you have to do that. So please.
First, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you, IPI, for convening this meeting. You and IPI and everyone here committed with this. You light our way.
Identify yourself.
Juan Di from the Panama Mission Security Council. I will try to be as fast as possible. Thank you for everything. Perhaps a positive future for multilateralism is linked to the next 3 opportunities of investment. Could it be in peace-building investment? Could it be in trust-building investment? Or could it be in positive impact communication of UN work in the ground to attract investment? That's my question.
Who would like to take that question? So I think you meant investments in terms of financial investments. Is that right? Or investment in time and effort, financial investments. The second one, investment in time and effort. Both. So I was configuration chair for Liberia many years ago, representing the Peace Building Commission. And I felt there was scope for the very thing that you were saying, that the way to help a country come to terms with the conflict it was emerging from is not to say local ownership, because after all, local ownership led to the conflict in the first place. And you don't want to say donor-driven. It has to be a partnership with some expertise and money's a sort of blended finance type of commitment, both to tie in the humanitarian to development and then to build the basis for future development. But there is one issue, and here Helen is the expert on the panel here. There's one issue which I found we were not very good at. You know, if I was a member state still, I would ask the UN, how is it after 80 years, you still don't have a formula for understanding how reconciliation is achieved? How is it you don't know how to achieve a permanent peace? And Jeff and I were involved in a debate in the Security Council about this. How can it be 80 years of trial and error and you don't know? You don't know how to achieve ceasefires. You don't know how to make mediation work. So others come in and take up with it. How is that possible? And the one problem we have is that we find it too easy to focus on physical infrastructure, rebuilding physical infrastructure or training or creating systems. But all the mental issues, the scarring, the problems up here, we don't like to go near it. There's no UN historical service to help countries sort out their narratives. Nothing like that. Why? It shouldn't be difficult for us to do it, but yet it seems to be. So the idea of how you do, peace building is something far more complex, and we don't dare go there. And I think we do. And we do need outside investors. Yes, please. The back.
Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Vitor Armandono, and I have a startup for real-time action around the sustainable development for efficient mobilization. And also trying to do Gen Z for Madame HG with a GWL. So, and also GWL has really great resources on women data as well. I have a couple of questions. So I've been seeing like you have every time that there is a convention, like you make a text and it seems like member state has to apply it. But I was wondering with the use of AI tools, like why couldn't there be a platform that integrates directly the text as a program, and every country within the moment in which there is a signatory thing already modify the algorithm, so then they can bring it back to their country and it already becomes part of the tool itself. So this was like I had this question. Then on like more like the veto part of it. So I have a youth movement. We are like in 160 countries, and we were discussing this idea to have, for example, a youth override. So in the case in which there is a veto that has been set, youth can come together and like in a jury duty style. So like one person from each country is appointed. Then we can all come together on like for a week or something. There is maybe people that are teaching us about the topic, and we decide with 193 countries about an answer. So this is something that maybe could be explored. And so about the us. So it seems that I also happen to be an intern and a consultant at the UN. Like I asked the question and they told me that it's member state, the answer. Like it's not the people, it's the clients of the UN are member states. But so they are member states in the convention, in the UN Charter. But maybe if we were to use the digital tools, then the people could become the author and the client of the digital tools, because in the same way that member states wanted their recognition, I think the people, the young people and more, they want also recognition, and so, but they also want to act. So how do we make that independent? And lastly, I think, collaboration is so fun, and it shouldn't be like for member state like a burden, like a tax to collaborate. And the other day I was with Madame on the in the trusteeship council, and I asked people to like change seat. Not that I would make you do that now, but if you want to give a seat to somebody who has been waiting, you can still do it. Yeah, it needs to be playful. Like we need to embody what we are talking about, and this needs to be also a physical process. It cannot just be about talking. So any of those 4 questions.
You are hired right away at IPI. I mean, what a brilliant blizzard, a blizzard of creative thinking. I love the idea of a youth override on veto, like a jury. It's your future. And the idea that you could, I mean, it's just mind-blowingly good. I think we're all in shock. But
it's ready for implementation.
Well, much of your thinking, we shouldn't immediately assume, because we have years of experience, that ideas that don't quite fit our understanding of the UN should be not thought through really carefully. So thank you for coming with that. I'd love to, if you could write them up so we can properly look at them, because it was a lot to absorb. I think we will do so. And just tell me when your contract runs out and we're hiring.
October 15.
So thank you.
Yes,
Mary.
I just want to also welcome your voice, and that you had the courage to come up and put some provocative ideas. But I didn't underestimate and don't underestimate what young people can do. We have the perfect example of the law students in Vanuatu. I think we all know this story, but it is an incredible story of law students discussing getting an advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the climate issue. That's where it came from. Mm-hmm. And they, got the Pacific Island law students, and then they got youth climate activists globally. And I met them at an early stage, and I was supporting them, but I thought they were mad. I thought, this is mad. We need mad ideas. And then we got this opinion, a brilliant opinion, which will make a difference, because we will see litigation, and we can use it in advocacy. And and this was so. This is exactly what we need. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could jump in on this. So, speaking of we're kind of taking it, it's great to have these ideas, but seriously, right? Like we talk about how tech companies have advanced so much. It's because they throw things at the wall and they see what sticks and they try to figure out if crazy can happen. So I know it sounds like, oh, really, are we going to get a youth override or the veto? Like, sure, but let's start with something that's out of the box, right? Because that's what prevents us from ever leaving the box. So I do also want to seriously take you up on some of the things that you said beyond just kind of giving you credit for having ideas. I think that so AI is a really interesting thing that I think we have to think through how we integrate it in the UN system. One thing to be very aware of with AI is that it just reinforces data that it's given. So it reinforces biases that it's given. And our digital world is extremely biased. So it's really important to make sure that we're not adding negative multiplier effects to an already biased algorithm. On generally the work that young people are doing at the UN, I think the youth delegates just don't get enough recognition for the amount of stuff they do behind the scenes, the young people in the missions. And let's also keep in mind, while youth delegates come together and negotiate once a year on the youth resolution, they're also here during UNGA, etc. But the people that write a lot of the ambassadors' talking points are their young staff, right? So there is real youth expertise in the system, and we really need to see how we can leverage that in a very specific way.
Yeah, Nadara, you remind me, and Sarah, my wife, knows this very well, that I once had two high school students working with me at the mission. And I said, in 2 weeks, I have a statement in the Security Council. You need to research it. You're going to come with me and sit behind me. And my only instruction to you is not to embarrass me. And the two of them didn't sleep for 2 weeks. And they produced a very good statement. So that supports what you're saying.
Can I do an activity? Can I do the same thing?
Yes.
So yeah, last time to change seat. So if you want to change seat in the room, and eventually so that everyone that was in the back, in the corridor waiting, can find a seat, and then for the rest of the session, you can fill the place of someone else, and in the meantime, you can exchange their contact and make the human rights better. Or not, you can do stuff.
Ladies and gentlemen, a future Secretary General of the UN. You can't be. No. Thank you. Thank you. Nina, please.
Hi, Nina Lahoud. I was with the UN for 34 years and in 6 missions, and now serve on boards and Diplomats Without Borders. I just wanted to go back to the first question that relates to both the prospect of a woman SG and Zeid's mention of leadership. And when people ask me, how did I enjoy my 34-year career, I always break it up in half. I said, well, the first half was under the most amazing leaders I ever served under. Maktiat Tassari, Lakhdar Brahimi, Kofi Annan, Bernard Kouchner, et cetera. Then we got the raft of leaders that served for 3 years, maybe a couple more, and left the system, and I saw it change. So what is the value and the impact of individual leaders, both at headquarters and the field, on how it can galvanize and motivate the multilateral system and UN staff? And it brings me back to the issue of the woman SG, because I remember in 2000 in Windhoek, Namibia, Madam Anstey recalled when she was asked to be SRSG, and she said, I was shuddering at the idea because there hadn't been, I think, only one other woman SRSG, and what they were going to expect of me. And they would set me up for failure because they'd be critical. So my question is, I want to see a woman SG candidate, but I want to see a bold woman SG candidate. I want to see a competent SG candidate. I don't want to just have a woman for a woman. I hope several emerge that fit that. So my question is, especially to the 2 women there, and I want to say, amidst all the despair in Gaza, when I saw both of you at the border on TV, speaking out in plain terms, showing your face and appealing on a human level, it added a little bit of spark that leadership exists, and we need more of that. I hope that emerges, you know. So if you could just address what are some of the human attributes, and maybe if there's going to be these interviews and panels, people should articulate, including the youth, what do you want to see in terms of human attributes for a UN leader? Thank you.
Mary.
At one level, there's a danger of expecting too much from a woman because she's going to be the first woman in a position. You know, that's a problem too. I think we do need somebody with courage at the moment because the world is so fractured, because we need the morale of the UN to be restored by a doing that speaks to people, that is moral, that has integrity, that gets out there and leads, and leads not just on humanitarian. The UN is not a humanitarian agency, full stop. It's for peace and security. It's to address the issues that concern us, the hard issues. And I think they, you know, I have no doubt that we have women candidates, and hopefully they will come forward, that will meet this. And I also have an expression which I like: never underestimate an underestimated woman.
Well, I think we're looking for a transformative leader, aren't we? And we're looking for a woman who can carry that forward. I agree with you. It's not just any woman. It's a woman who can do the job. Now, Zeid made the point before that not everyone does well at public debates and presentations. I think if you look at where the candidates tend to come from, there will be former heads of state or government. Michelle Bachelet's president announced her yesterday. There will be people who've been ministers. There will presumably be people who come out of the diplomatic stream. If you think of the Latin American and Caribbean region, which I think has the strongest call on the post next time, I can just think of any number of highly qualified women out of each of those categories who could come forward and be the kind of transformative leader that we need. Someone who acknowledges the gravity of the times, but says, I'm rolling up my sleeves here. I'm going to be absolutely relentless in the search for peace. I want to see human rights upheld. I want to see, you know, the war on poverty continue because the job's not done. You know, someone who's really going to put stakes in the ground across the areas of the mandate. I do think, and this is reflected in the elders' core of multilateralism here, that in the charter review, I suppose it would have to happen, but we need a 1 7-year term. You know, the 2 5-year terms are hopeless because, to be honest, the first 5 years is spent looking over your shoulder as to whether you'll be re-elected. And the example of Boutros Ghani, who got offside with Madeleine Albright, is sobering, isn't it? He was blocked his second term. So 1 7-year run at doing everything you can, I think, is what is needed. But look, I've just got absolute confidence that out of Latin America and the Caribbean, the kind of candidate we'd love to see can emerge. The issue is, will that kind of candidate be too threatening to those who, on the spectrum of secretary to general, prefer the pen holder to the general?
Thank you. Dara, would you like to jump in on this one? Thank you. I think we will have time for one more question, and then we'll have to, yes, sir, in the middle, please.
Thank you, Alejandro Torres from the Global Cooperation Institute. Previously, I was part of Colombian government, and I was part of the team that coordinated the response of Colombian government to the Venezuelan migration crisis. And in that position, I understood the importance of the strengthening of local communities to start constructing like a really important approach for international cooperation. So one of my questions and the thing that we have been working at Global Cooperation Institute is to find new approaches for international cooperation, such as global public investment, that Helen, you have been supporting this initiative, such as circular cooperation, a way how we are going to understand like the role of the global South in promoting different solutions for the global problematics. So my question is how we are going to shift like global North leaders, their narrative about the importance of including global South in global solutions and in global problematics, because I believe that one of our biggest problems in the future of multilateralism is that global North have been not understanding the importance of global South in this co-creation. So how do you think like the next Secretary General could encourage global South to be an active actor for the transforming of global problems and global solutions? Thank you.
We hosted last night here at IPI the G20 ministerial dinner. And following on from FFD and the conference in Seville, the discussion was good. And today the G20 were meeting throughout the day, the ministers. But one of the observations, which is not going to be unexpected, is that so often in terms of the debt crisis, which is what they were focusing on, or any other issue, the discussion is circular. Everyone's just repeating the same statements, but in different fora, but the same statements. So I think your point that somewhere there needs to be an interruption and there needs to be a change, either in tone, which then leads to a substantive change, but repetition of positions over and over again serves little purpose. And so I think the point is merited. Nidara, please.
If I could maybe push back a little bit on the framing of the question. And before I do, there was actually one point on the Secretary General selection. I think it's really important that candidates that are put forward have town halls with civil society and have discussions with young people. I hope that we can push for that quite heavily, speaking also to the first question that was raised today. Just to push back a little bit on this narrative, right, of global North, global South, and almost like the global South asking for permission to engage in these global kind of new visions together. I think a lot of the energy is actually coming from the global South. And so they can build it and have the global North join. I also think that we often like homogenize the North and South, but there are lots of countries that have similarities and differences between them in those two groups. So you take kind of middle powers, right? There are striking similarities between, say, like a Canada and a Brazil, or like an Indonesia and a Portugal or a Spain. Like, I think we have to go beyond the dichotomy of global North, global South, and start looking at who cares about what issues, who has what kind of power, who is like aligned on trade, who is aligned on other spaces. Like if we're talking multi-aligned governments and coalitions of the willing, I think it's really important to push past this like false dichotomy that was maybe reflective of a past world order, but is not true anymore, and start to think about issue-oriented action coalitions.
Thank you, Nidara, and what a wonderful way to bring this discussion to a close. I'd like, on behalf of the elders, to thank all of you for attending, and on behalf of all of you, I would like to thank Mary Robinson, Helen Clark, and Nidara for the. Thank you.